work for? Attempted murder and murder.
You've been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder and murder.
Could be worse.
In just a few weeks, 3 men were slain, 2 were gravely injured, and Joanna Dennehy was on the run. Who is one of the UK's most dangerous female killers? Joanna Dennehy was born on August 29, 1982, in St Albans, Hertfordshire, to Kathleen and Kevin Dennehy. Kathleen worked long hours in a supermarket while Kevin worked for BT. Dennehy had a younger sister, Maria, and their childhood was filled with love and stability. Dennehy was bright and capable as a young girl, excelling in school and aspiring to be a lawyer. Her parents even paid for extra tuition to assist her to reach her goal. She was a good fit for both the school hockey and netball teams. Dennehy was a sweet and compassionate child, but as she grew older, she began to change. She stopped caring about school and started getting into trouble with the cops because she got mixed up with the wrong crowd. Dennehy began drinking and using drugs when she was 14 years old, and she began dating John Traynor, a man 6 years her senior. Her parents were not pleased with her new relationship and urged her to buckle down and finish school instead of dating a much older man. Dennehy, on the other hand, had other ideas and rushed away to be with John. They were discovered living on harsh wasteland not far from the family home a few weeks later. Dennehy was returned home, but it wasn't long before she ran away once more. The pair made their home in Luton, this time before relocating to Milton Keynes. Joanna had 2 children shortly after that, while she was still in her teens. Following the birth of her first child, she informed her parents that they would have to pay to visit their grandson, which exacerbated the rift between them and finally ended their relationship. Dennehy constantly cheated on John, and their relationship was rocky. She would abandon the children for days, if not weeks, before returning and begging pardon. The couple relocated to East Anglia in hopes of a new beginning, but things only grew worse. Dennehy began his career as a farm laborer, where he was occasionally compensated in booze rather than cash. She'd started self-harming, cutting her arms, body, and neck with razor blades, and etching a star tattoo under her right eye. Dennehy's violent outbursts were becoming more frequent, and when she was drunk, she would attack John. As John's fear of Dennehy grew, he realized it was only a matter of time until he was wounded. Dennehy had begun to carry a dagger in her boot, which alarmed him. In 2009, he abandoned her and took the children with him. Dennehy's life continued to go downward, with her committing crimes such as assault and carrying a blade in public. She also used prostitution to support her alcohol and drug addictions. At 2012, she received a 14-week sentence for stealing and spent a few days in Peterborough City Hospital, where she was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder and obsessive-compulsive disorder. She was tested by a forensic psychiatrist while in prison and diagnosed with paraphilia sadomasochism, a disorder in which one gets sexual pleasure from behaviors that involve the inflicting of pain, humiliation, or bondage. Dennehy enjoyed inflicting and receiving pain. Dennehy was also diagnosed with underlying psychopathic tendencies such as fury, impulsivity, aggression, and anger, and was prescribed medication to help her manage her emotions. Dennehy was a serial liar who claimed to have murdered her father and spent time in prison for it. She said she had been abused for years, but her father was still alive and well, and no inquiry into the allegations of abuse have ever been conducted. Dennehy met Kevin Lee, a 48-year-old property developer in the Peterborough area, in 2013. Lee rented rooms to persons who were at risk or in need. Lee began paying Dennehy's rent shortly after they met, and the two began a sexual connection. Dennehy began working for Lee as an enforcer, threatening and forcing other renters into paying him their bills. Dennehy's life has become more steady for the first time in a long time. She had a job and a place to live, sort of. Dennehy stopped taking her medication after being convinced of her newfound stability. Kevin Lee's body was discovered in a ditch in Newborough by a dog walker on March 30th, 2013. He was clothed in a black sequin gown and appeared to be in an intentionally embarrassing position. Kevin had been murdered the day before. When Lee failed to return home after arranging to meet Dennehy at one of his houses on March 29th, his wife promptly called the police and reported him missing. His car was found burned the next day on a farm track in nearby Yaxley, and it was swiftly determined that Dennehy's phone had pinged in the vicinity of where his car was found burning thanks to his wife's panicked calls to the numbers in his phone. When police arrived at the property where she was living, they discovered a blood-stained mattress in the garden, but the blood did not match Lee's. As the police investigation progressed, they discovered that another tenant, John Chapman, a Royal veteran, was missing. The bodies of John Chapman and another man, Lucas Slabowski, were discovered near Thornley after Dennehy was arrested for the murder of Kevin Lee. Prior to Kevin Lee's disappearance, they had both been stabbed to death. Slabozowski was a Polish national who was slain on March 19th, according to authorities. Dennehy had been his lover after they met through their shared interest in booze and drugs. Dennehy had used provocative messages to lure Slabozowski to a property, then stabbed him in the heart. Dennehy, unable to dispose of the body on her own, sought assistance from a friend. Gary Stretch Richards was that friend. Standing at 7'2", the name Stretch was aptly given to him. Stretch went to the flat with an acquaintance, Leslie Layton. Slabozowski's body was transported to a wheelie bin outside a nearby block of flats by the two of them. Dennehy proudly presented the body to a 14-year-old girl in the neighborhood who had witnessed what they were doing. Dennehy and Stretch took his body and dumped it into a ditch in the Peterborough countryside, where it stayed for days. Blood splatter analysis revealed that the attack was protracted and prolonged, according to forensic experts who examined the property. Slabozowski's execution was violent and sadistic. Dennehy then killed her housemate, John Chapman, with a pocket knife. Investigators assuming this happened while he slept because Chapman's blood was later found on the property's mattress. Richards and Layton were once again tasked with disposing of the body, and Chapman's remains were dumped in the ditch right alongside Slabozowski's. Joanna Dennehy called Gary Stretch Richards and sung the Britney Spears song, "Oops, I Did It Again," down the line after killing her third victim, Kevin Lee. Dennehy and her accomplice, Stretch, fled after the killings, and a police search was launched right away to find them. Soon after, a police officer in Norfolk saw the plea and realized that Dennehy had committed a gas station theft he was investigating, so he passed over the registration of the car she was spotted in. Kevin Lee owned that vehicle. Dennehy and Stretch were repeatedly caught on CCTV as they attempted to flee the police. Stretch, who stood 7'3" tall, was easy to detect, and they seemed unconcerned about being noticed. To fund their escape, the couple committed burglaries, including stealing a camera which they used to photograph themselves out and about, giving the impression that they were a couple on a road trip to passerbys. They traveled to Kington, Hertfordshire, where they met up with Mark Lloyd, a former petty burglar and another of Stretch's acquaintances. When Lloyd was called in to help them sell their stolen goods, Dennehy didn't hesitate to inform him she had killed 3 men and wanted to kill more. Dennehy announced his arrival in Hertfordshire while waving a huge knife. The Lloyds didn't object. As she drank whiskey, her behavior got increasingly erratic as she became hyper and violent. Joanna was becoming irritated when they stopped at a shop for smokes. She requested Stretch to find her a victim, minutes after leaving the shop, to which Stretch replied by pointing to the first man he saw and asking, would he do? Robin Bereza, a 63-year-old former firefighter, was the individual in question. Bereza was walking his dog 100 yards from his house when Dennehy struck him from behind, stabbing him twice. It was just 3 p.m., and the sun was shining brightly. Dennehy returned to the car calmly before announcing that she needed to find another victim. Stretch recommended someone else and pointed out another dog walker. John Rogers, 56, was the individual in question. Dennehy attacked him from behind once more, stabbing him in the back multiple times. Dennehy twisted Rogers over and began stabbing him in the chest as he collapsed to the floor. Rogers was stabbed almost 30 times in the back, chest, and abdomen in all. Dennehy returned to the car, taking Rogers' dog with her, and Dennehy, Stretch, and Lloyd fled once more. A short time later, their car was parked outside a row of businesses near the attacks. An armed cop swooped in to grab Dennehy. Dennehy was composed throughout her detention and offered no opposition. She appeared happy while being booked into the police station, laughing, flirting with the officers, and making racist remarks. She performed Singing in the Rain as she was escorted to the cells, demonstrating a cold, emotionless reaction to being reprimanded in custody for several murders. Her parents were informed of her arrest, which was the first time they had heard from her in almost a decade. Both Robin Bereza and John Rogers were able to describe their perpetrator to the authorities after they were attacked. As she attacked him, Rogers overheard Dennehy say, "Oh look, you're bleeding. I'd better do some more." Dennehy told her conspirators, according to Mark Lloyd, that she wanted to kill 9 males in all, but not a woman, especially one with children. Dennehy's motive for stabbing these individuals was sheer entertainment. As she had stated to Stretch, "I want my fun. I need you to get my fun," she said later, adding that she found murder to be Moorish and that she developed a taste for it after the first homicide. Dennehy showed no guilt or remorse for her actions. On the 8th of May 2013, Joanna Dennehy was charged with the murder of Kevin Lee and the attempted murders of Robin Bereza and John Rogers. Dennehy's relationship with both Slabzowski and Chapman, as well as the other victims, were established. The same knife was used on all 5 victims according to pathology. Prison staff discovered an escape scheme in Dennehy's notebook while she was on reprimand before the trial. The plot called for killing or physically injuring a jail guard, then cutting one of the fingers off and using it to deceive the prison's biometric system. Because of the conspiracy, Dennehy was held in solitary confinement from September 2013 to September 2015. Joanna Dennehy pleaded guilty to all charges on November 21, 2013. Mark Lloyd testified against her at the Old Bailey at her sentence hearing. Lloyd was not charged with any crime despite his claims that he was an unwitting witness to the final 2 murder attempts. Gary Stretch was described in court as a scared, nodding dog to Dennehy, who was described by police as a sadistic serial killer with a fearsome personality throughout the trial. After hearing that he would be serving for at least 19 years, he exclaimed, "Thank you very much." Leslie Layton was found guilty of perverting the course of justice. They were both convicted of further crimes 2 days later, including hindering the lawful burial of a deceased. Perverting the course of justice was found guilty of Leslie Layton. Layton and Richards were found guilty on all other charges, including 3 counts of hindering the legal burial of the body, on February 12th. Joanna Dennehy was sentenced to life in prison at the Old Bailey on February 28, 2014. Mr. Justice Spencer, the trial judge, recommended that she never be released. He said that this was justified because each murder was planned ahead of time. Mark Lloyd testified against her, claiming that he was an unwitting bystander during the final 2 murder attempts and hence was not charged. Dennehy was sentenced to life in prison and given a whole life tariff on February 28, 2014. Prosecutors said that Dennehy cast a spell and went after her victims for fun. She is said to have boasted to one witness during the worldwide manhunt that she had killed 8 people, despite the fact that no more killings had been discovered. 3 men were brutally murdered in Petersboro, and 2 men were stabbed in West Mercia. "We are pleased today their killer and her willing accomplices are now behind bars," stated Detective Chief Inspector Martin Brunning, who headed the investigation into Dennehy's crimes. "Joanna Dennehy is a dangerous person who will never be allowed to go free. I am relieved her accomplices will also be facing a substantial period of time behind bars. She is a vicious serial killer with a scary attitude who carried out these savage murders on guys who posed no threat to her. Our hearts go out to the families and survivors of those who have been harmed by these individuals' actions. Dennehy's actions will haunt 2 of the victims for the rest of their lives. I'm hoping that today's sentence will bring some closure to these tragic events. I'd also like to express our condolences to the Dennehy family, who are still trying to come to grips with what Joanna has done. And I hope that this outcome will allow them to move on as well. Joanna is just one of 3 women in the UK to serve a whole life tariff, the other 2 being the now deceased Moors murderer Myra Henley and the serial killer Rose West. For context, Myra Henley was a serial killer in England. She raped and murdered 5 young children with her partner, Ian Brady, and Rose West was convicted in 1995 for the murders of 10 young girls and women. Rose West has become one of the most well-known female mass murderers in the United Kingdom. Rose preyed on vulnerable teenage girls and women with her husband Fred, allowing them to act out their fantasies, which eventually led to murder. Dennehy was on probation at the time of the murders, following convictions for assault and having a dangerous dog, and it was determined that her probation officials had received insufficient training. Dennehy was housed at HMP Low Newton in Durham, which also houses serial killer Rose West. When Dennehy stated her intention to murder Rose West, jail officials decided to transport her to HMP Newhall in Wakefield, West Yorkshire. Since Dennehy's capture and imprisonment, her daughter has spoken publicly of how she was contemplating suicide owing to a devastating dread of becoming like her mother. Cheyenne Trainer was only 13 years old when she learned that her mother, Joanna Dennehy, had murdered 3 men in 10 days. However, she claimed that knowledge of her mother's crimes had a direct impact on her mental health and that she had lost her senses. Cheyenne spent years trying to figure out how her mother went from a loving mother to a man-hating sociopath. She told the Sunday People she finally visited her in jail in 2018 to try to find out. "I was told nothing about my mom, and I wanted answers," she said. "I turned 18 and started to look into it. Eventually, I got an email telling me where she was. In October last year, I wrote her a letter. I was really cold because I thought she hated me. I told her I wasn't looking for a relationship with her. I just wanted to know why. But I got a letter full of love and warmth, and how much she wanted to have me in her life. I just cried. I was so emotional. I was nervous, shaking. When I got into the visit hall, I had to take a double look when I saw her. She looks completely different. We were the only persons in the room apart from the guards. We sat opposite each other at the table. She was wearing a black t-shirt, blue jeans, and boots. She got short blonde hair and piercings on her face, one next to her eye. She looks well. I said to my mother, "I've missed you." In all honesty, I never thought I'd see her again. I never thought she'd do what she did, or that she'd ever be in my life again. We both just cried. I asked her, why? She apologized to me. It doesn't make it right and doesn't excuse anything, but I wanted the apology. Part of the punishment is that she will never get to see me grow up or get married. Dennehy was the driving force behind everything that happened, and she is the only reason these three individuals are no longer living. Stretch was an after-the-fact collaborator rather than a co-conspirator. As we had seen with Henley and West earlier, it's still up for debate whether Henley and West would have killed if they hadn't met their spouses. But this isn't the case for Dennehy. With or without the assistance of Gary Stretch Richards, Dennehy was going to cause misery and murder. Dennehy had no other motivation but to inflict agony and take someone's life. Her attacks were completely random, and she had no other victim profile than male. Maybe it's because of this that she's even more terrifying.